Ask the Podcast Coach for July 6th, 2019.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that fun-filled music that means it's Saturday. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach. I'm your host, Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one, the only. He gets up early every Saturday morning to do this. Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. How's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Let's just be honest. I'm old. I just wake up. I don't actually get up early. I just wake up.
Yeah. If you're watching us live, we are not using the Spreaker thing today because Dave is troubleshooting his internet connection by going directly to his modem.
Yeah.
Yes. We've cut the router out of the picture today, and we'll see if that fixes it. If it is, I was going to go to Best Buy. Jim, you're saying Best Buy, not the best place to.
They don't have the biggest selection.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's the problem. I mean, it's a good store. I like it.
I was there last night.
Yeah, no, I like it. But they just don't have the widest selection at the best price. And this is Amazon's the evil empire, but you just get so many more choices there. And especially in this kind of area of a router, switch, whatever we're going to call that thing. You get a better choice that way.
Yeah. If you want to jump on in, if you have a question, go to askthepodcastcoach.com/join, and you can jump right in here. Speaking of Best Buy, I was at Best Buy last night. Never underestimate. Yeah, don't underestimate the power of swag. I was in Best Buy last night, and I had a Podfest t-shirt on, and this guy walks over and he goes, "You do like podcasting stuff?" He goes, "What was that one?" And I'm like, "Oh, this is in Florida, blah, blah, blah." He works for iHeart in Clear Channel, and he's got a couple different stations. He was on, he said, pulling the card, 96.9 Radio Free Akron. Chris
low power FM.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And he said he's got a streaming station. I'm like, "Oh, I can help you with that." I go, because podcasting's on demand. You don't have to worry about the streaming stuff. And I forget, the reason it cost him so much is he's paying all the ASCAP and BMI and all that stuff. Because I'm like, he goes, "Oh yeah, you gotta do all that stuff." And I was like, "Oh, icky." So
podcasters could learn from that, by the way. Like the radio guys do it right when it comes to licensing and all those pieces that they do. Like they get it right. That's why they can do all the things that they do. Podcasters want to do this for like a nickel. And so you can't get those things for free. If you want to use them, you can't get the best music. You can't do those kinds of things. So we could learn a little bit. And I think there's some companies, I heard Rob Greenlee allude to this the other day. And one of the things he's on, that they're like some of the podcast host companies are starting to think through this licensing bit. And if the podcast companies can do it, Spreaker, before he left Spreaker, was kind of on the forefront of this licensing. They had some music you could get before, some other things, right? They were trying to do this. And I think eventually that's the smart route, right? Have these big companies kind of come together and you pay a fee to be a part of a license holder, right? Doesn't that make sense?
Yeah, I think Blueberry has one too for some sort of music. Spreaker has one, and they keep hinting that the guy from, I think it's podcastmusic.com, says that there's some big news coming. And I'm like, well, I'll believe it when I say it. But speaking of big things coming, we have a question from Brian that he called in over the week.
Hi, Dave and Jim. Just wanted your update feedback of what you think of Whooskaa now that they have a paid version, an upgraded premium type version. If you've had a chance to look at it, Dave, I'd appreciate your feedback. I know that you've mentioned that for any free podcast hosting, you've mentioned that Whooskaa is one you would maybe consider compared to, say, the other free type of hostings that are available out there. So I'd love your opinion about the latest updates with Whooskaa as a free podcast hosting.
Okay, so here's
thanks, Jim and Dave.
Didn't mean to cut him off. What's cool about this Backpack Studio thing is when it gets down to the last 5 seconds, it starts to trace a red circle around it to kind of let you know that, hey, you're almost done. So here's my criteria for media hosts. Number one, don't mess with my file. Whatever I upload is what I want people to download. Not No. And I almost give them a pass on this because there is no way but they did this before they did dynamic ad insertion, but any company that does dynamic ad insertion is not going to keep your file name. That's just, that's kind of so give me the ability to have an unlimited back catalog. Okay, that works. Don't limit my audience size, unlimited bandwidth. Okay. Don't control my feed and make it easy to leave if I choose to do so. I need to be able to put in a 301 redirect. They do that. It's not super easy to find, and their tutorial on their website is outdated from what their interface now looks like, but I figured it out. Number 5, give me support. I'm assuming they have support. Charge me for your service so you can stay in business. Well, this is the weird one. Their free version is free. Their paid version is $99. And I'm kind of like, that
escalates fast.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you want dynamic ad insertion on Libsyn, it's $99, I think, is the cheapest it starts at. And then the more shows you get, the cheaper it gets, or I'm sorry, take the most expensive it gets. And then there are other bandwidth fees and things like that. And for more information on that, email rob@libsyn.com, because I can't talk on that. And then last one, give me stats. Well, they're actually IAB certified. I heard, I think it was James Cridlin say that. So one would think that, hey, really the only thing that they do is they mess with my file. So then I went over to BernieTheCatShow.com, because Bernie the Cat was a Whooskaa. That's the other thing. I swear I can type in their address and it doesn't. I have to almost Google Whooskaa because it's KAA, I think, or something weird. And
it is 2 A's, KAA.com.
Yeah. And here's the fun thing. None of my files worked this morning. Like, I'm like, what? That's weird. So then I went in, and this is they changed my file. Like, I used to have, let's just say whatever, whooshkaa.com/BernieTheCat1.mp3. And I went over, and it was now like media.whooshkaa.com/ and I was like, whoa, you changed all my, so none of my files worked. So I'm like, all right. So then I copied the one that was the actual file name, pasted it in there, hit play, and still got this file doesn't live here. And I'm like, well, they seem to pass all my criteria. I guess I need to add an 8th one. And I would like the file to play when I hit play. I was like, so, and I will say I tried to play with their dynamic ad insertion. Not the most on one hand, wow, do they give you tons of, as any decent system would, you can pick where it goes and what time and blah blah blah. But every time I went to do it, it was like, pick your show, and I'm like, okay, pick the show. It's Bernie the Cat and the worst podcast ever. Go. And it was like, you didn't select any shows. So there's some check mark I'm not checking or whatever. But my biggest complaint is your files didn't play when I click play. So and I'll be interested to see. Because this is they're kind of going the Anchor route. They're going to try to make money from their free service by having, dynamic ads. And I'm like, that hasn't really worked yet, but kudos for trying. So we shall see. But I remember when I first heard about them and I emailed them, and they do something else besides Whooskaa. There's another company that owns Whooskaa. And whatever that does makes tons of money is basically what they said, which kind of reminded me of Blab. Yeah. And I'm like, I've heard that before.
We have plenty of money. We have plenty of money. We're not going to do this anymore.
Yeah, we're done. We're out of here. So that was the toy I got to play with. Jim, you were playing with a toy I've played with, which was Otter.ai.
Yeah. Why have I not done this before? Like, I'm sure if we go back in the back catalog of Ask the Podcast Coach, we've talked about this before. And I've had a high schooler, so I have a high school internship program at Gallup. And at the beginning of the summer, I asked him, like, let's look at some services to help me transcribe the shows better. And really what I was looking for, the transcriptions are so terrible. What I was really looking for was a service that could correct the transcriptions that are awful and do it fast. And you could take the transcriptions and move it into somewhere where you could use Grammarly on it. I mean, all those kinds of things work to get that done. But that was a project I gave to them. And one of them came to Otter. And Dave, like, it's great. Like, I do not know why more people aren't talking about it. And they are. I went to one of the podcast groups on Facebook and I put in Otter. I'm like, how come I haven't really done this yet? And there was plenty of conversation about it. So by the way, that's the right thing to do. You go to the Facebook group first and you go to the search, and then you type for what you're looking for first.
Yay.
Just saying. So, nobody listening to the show would do that, by the way. I mean, you guys would always do the right thing. But what's really cool about Otter, so I ran some Gallup podcasts and some of my own podcasts through a test account. And the very first time you put it in, it tries to go through and recognize and break the speakers up, so it separates the transcripts. It's really a transcription engine. That's right. It's really what it does best. And so I went through and corrected one of them and hit kind of like what do they call it? Something speakers. There's a reprocess, right? It takes 10 or 15 minutes to do. And holy cow, it really does a great job of separating. Once it kind of learns the voice patterns that are in there, it starts assigning. It goes back through and corrects all the transcripts kind of based on what it's learned. Then the second podcast is even better, because you put that in and it starts learning from the first and applies it to the second. And you can make some minor corrections in the second, and it will then say reprocess, and it'll do it again. The accuracy on that thing is freakishly crazy. Now, the accuracy of what the people are saying is all dependent on the sound quality of the file that you give it. And like, I never finish sentences, and I never say anything complete, and I don't really say words right. And so it's not its fault that it didn't get me right on all those things. I'm kind of excited to throw the third one in and see what it gets, let it process, let it do its thing. But I'm interested in, like, this could really at work. I have a guy who goes in and listens for things and types out little segments for us, and he does these 2 or 3 little breakouts with some timestamps. This could completely change that for him. Instead of him having to listen for those, he could listen for content, get the title out of it, put the timestamps in, and he's done. So Otter has been pretty amazing. I just don't know why I haven't done it before.
What I used it for is I had a client that does it's called Free Advice Friday. Amy Collins, she's a book guru, which was awesome, because I'm like, I could use a book guru right now. And I kept explaining to her what show notes were. I'm like, can you write a little paragraph about whatever you talk about? And for whatever reason, I was not explaining this right, and she wasn't getting it, and kept sending me like one sentence that was basically, Amy answers your questions. So I'm like, yeah, I think people got that. So I pointed her at Otter. I said, can you run the audio through this if you want, or I'll do it, or whatever. And she does, because it's great. All I need are the questions that she asks. And it's see, I've never done the thing where I've edited, because when I saw it, I was like, this is machine editing. It's not it's like 80%, which is not bad, but that's whatever. 2 out of 10 words is I think it also depends on what you're talking about too, because like with her, she's using all these company names, like, designed to, I forget what it is, but it's a bunch of weird company names.
They struggle. Oftentimes they struggle with brand names. Yeah.
But for me, it's great, because I can go through and just look for the word like how or what or who or whatever. And I'm like, oh, there's a question. And it cut her bill in like half, because I used to have to listen to her show. And that's the other thing. I can actually see because a lot of times she'll do this. She'll be like, okay, because it's a live show, and she'll go, okay, let's see if anybody else has a question. Okay. And I'm like, okay, this is dead air, so I can see if she's doing that, which is also pretty easy to see in the audio. But so otter.ai, it's 600 minutes a month. That's the other thing.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, for most people, that's a lot. I can get away with it. Like my regular show, I do 4 shows a month. They're an hour and 20 minutes. That gets me. That's right there. Like it's pretty close. I could do both, and even the paid version, $10 a month for 6,000 minutes.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, no, it's super generous.
That's
one of the things I want to contact them on, though, in what. So Microsoft has a video indexing service on Azure that does something very, very similar to this. And one of the things it allows you to do is put a file in place when it's doing the editing to help the machine learning, because this is what it's doing, help the machine learning do the transcriptions better. So like Gallup is spelled Gallup, not OP. And 90% of the time when I never say look at that horse is galloping, or that person was running at a gallop. I never say that, right? So almost 100% of the time, every time I say Gallup, it needs to be spelled with a U, not an O. I can tell the file that, and it'll pick it up as a brand, and it'll capitalize it. That's another important part, right? So I need to contact the guys over there at Otter and say, are you doing anything in the transcriptions? Or if I correct the transcriptions, will those corrections build a file for me that will allow that machine learning to be better? I always say I'm Jim Collison and live from the Gallup Studios here in Omaha, Nebraska. It always puts Carlson in there, Carlson, right? And okay, it's close. And I say Collison, not Carlson. They're close. I get that,
Right.
But I should be able to correct that and then have it correct itself in future versions. Man, if they could nail that, Dave, lights out. Like
Game
I could.
changer.
Oh yeah. Now, if they could just get me to speak better, actually on the podcast, that would be even better. If they could help me finish sentences and those kinds of things.
We've got a question here in the chat. What do you feel about Zoom.us? This is where I need Steve Stewart. Here's the thing. From what I understand, the recording that you get from Zoom is at a really weird sample rate. It's at like 33 something instead of 44.1. So you're taking less pictures of your audio. It's definitely listenable, but not great, because that's what I get for, speaking of Free Advice Friday, that's what she sends me. She sends me the video file from Zoom, and I then take it, convert it to a wave, and try to kind of edit it there. What I do with Zoom when if I ever do an interview via Zoom is I run it out of my computer. I take the audio from my computer and run it into some sort of recording device, because yes, it's still going to be compressed because we're going over the internet, but it's at my own, it's a WAV file. I'm not, because with their recording, it's streamed across the internet and it's not recorded in the absolute best format you can get. So it's a little better than typical. My favorite is Squadcast. I think they're like, it seems, and that's the other thing about Zoom that I really am getting annoyed with. They have a giant microphone button that says mute. And then they have this little sliver of an up pointing arrow that you have to click on to say, what is your microphone and what is your headphones? And I would love to have that either split in half and say microphone and then mute or something, because I have a video that shows people how to use Zoom, and because I use it for the School of Podcasting office hours. And I'm always having to take screenshots and then share my screen to go click on that thing right there, where Squadcast kind of smacks you in the face and goes, what are you using? I mean, the only kind of downside of Squadcast is you have to use Chrome. But I'm like, like if somebody go, oh, what's a Chrome? I don't think we're going to run into that. I know there are people that love their Firefox and love their Safari. And yes, there are those people that love Microsoft Edge. And I'm like, really?
Nobody loves Edge. It's going to Chrome as well. But Chrome is, there are people who are getting, like Facebook, are getting more and more concerned about what goes on inside of Chrome. That's just the problem. It's that Google is spying on you for sure inside of Chrome, for sure. Like you have no privacy. Now you can install blockers and stuff. So Dave, that's the one hang up is, and I work with a lot of tech folks. And so when I say, hey, we're going to use Hangouts or whatever, and we're going to use Chrome, this has been a nice thing about using StreamYard is it's pretty agnostic. It doesn't care what browser you're currently using for the most part. Although it probably works better on Chrome.
I'm going to say I use Chrome.
Yeah, and I think everybody does. But I think it's going to become a growing issue because Google is definitely spying on you.
And just notice, though, no weird, freaky. I haven't lost contact yet. So
that's true.
And we'll give it a test here because it's time to. Doggone it! I thought it was going to be such a great transition, and I hit the wrong.
It still can be. We're going to thank our awesome supporters.
Yeah, because it's the beginning of the month, and I was like, "Where? Here we go."
I'm always surprised at how long this list is.
Well, it's
I go mow the lawn while you're doing this. So.
Well, that's my whole thing. I'm starting to worry. Is like, was this whole thing of thanking everybody at the beginning of the month was like, maybe that wasn't. I don't want to like have people fast forwarding through stuff. So our $20 donators, there we go. Patrons are awesome supporters, awesome people like Greg from DebtShepherd.com, Glenn the Geek Hebert from HorseRadioNetwork.com, Joshua Rivers from PodcastingExperiments.com. Aviation News Talk. That is our good friend Max Truscott. Shane over at spybrary.com. Carrie Bond at the Key West Perspective. Find it at keywestperspective.com/podcast. My buddy Ronsley down in Australia at Amplify Media Group. Find him at mustamplify.com. Carl White at lifeinthecarolinas.podcast.com. Kim Craggy, which we have a question from. We might hit that later at toastmasters101.net. And we'll thank our $10 supporters in just a bit. So we did have a question from Kyle Bondo, which I love his name. I do. And I also love Kyle. Do you still do Merchants of Dirt? It's like the best named podcast ever. Says there seems to be a few podcast hosts that are in the business only producer space, like Fireside.fm and Transistor.fm, who I just looked at barely for the first time ever, like 2 days ago, which is build your SaaS podcast. Is there a middle tier hosting market forming? Maybe. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I think there's space for it for sure.
Yeah, because I noticed. Oh, what did I watch? It might have been Whooskaa. There was somebody that was like adding your producer, or they'll have like a hosting package where it's like it's X amount a month and it's you, and like you get two logins to your account. And I was like, that's kind of different. So, and I think there was one where you could it was Pinecast, who's the $5 a month. Boy, there's a bad business model. $5 a month for as many podcasts as you want, for as many episodes as you want. And I'm like, that just reeks of abuse me. You know what I mean?
It's not free though. It's not free. That $5 bump stops.
Yeah.
I think probably some of that because we just have cheap enough people. They're like, no, not even $5. And you're like, okay, then you probably shouldn't be there.
Yeah. And Kyle makes a great point though. For whatever reason, none of those hosts ever show up at conferences. It's always Libsyn, Blueberry Pod being the speaker. That is true. I've never seen Castos. I've never seen Pinecast. The only one I've ever seen, and he didn't have a booth, was the guy from Awsound. I think his name is Mark.
Mm-hmm. We interviewed him here.
Yeah, and he stopped by and said hi. But in terms of and that's where you kind of scratch your head, because especially let's say it's podcast movement. I mean, that is the biggest event. If you could only do one, I would think it would be that. Depending on who your market is, you might go Podfest, and they're not there. And I realize those booths are somewhere between, I don't know, I'm going to guess $500 to $1,000, maybe a little more. Anybody know? Daniel might know because he had a booth one year.
How expensive they are.
Yeah. And
I don't think it's a price thing. I think it's a market thing. Like Libsyn, Spreaker, Blueberry, they really target. Now they also target other groups, but they really target the consumer market, right? That's the solo podcaster who's out there doing it by himself or herself. Doing this thing kind of, that's the roots. Now, Libsyn, Blueberry, Spreaker, they also have enterprise solutions as well. And they have large enterprises doing the stuff that they do on them. But their target had really started in the consumer space. I think these other organizations are starting in the enterprise space to begin with. That's why they're doing what they do. The podcast movement is not really their target. It should be, but it's not. I don't think they believe that's money well spent for what they're doing. So,
yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
Jim is pointing out that I am sitting.
You're lower than me,
and that's because I'm trying to fit the TV in.
I know.
So I just need to sit up straight.
So it's so funny. I was using StreamYard for one at work, and my co-hosts was a little fainter. So she was a little whiter and I was a little darker. And we had somebody in the audience go, "Hey, can you guys?" I was like, "Really?
Yeah,
like that? Really?" So
yes. Somebody asked, "What was the alternative to Zoom?" That is Squadcast. If you go to schoolofpodcasting.com/Squadcast, it's a pretty cool system. That's the one where it records everybody locally to your local hard drive and then uploads it later, and you get separate tracks and all sorts of fun stuff like that. And speaking of other fun stuff, let's thank our $10 supporters. We're talking about awesome people like Jeffrey over at Podnuts. That's PODNUTZ. That's the computer repair podcast. Jonathan Bloom at weeklyawesome.com. Michael over at babymountainradio.com. He does the show Caregivers for Dementia. Nick Suberling at cincinnati-soccertalk.com. I haven't heard from Subes in a while. I'll have to reach out. Sean Parker. Yeah, well, it's soccer season. Sean at beyourownnerd.com. Barry Kessler at barrykessler.com. Jay Cleveland Payne at morebettermedia.com. And we will thank our $5 supporters in our next segment. So I wish I could set this is another thing about StreamYard. I wish I could set it like a default. So it just goes back to that one instead of the one.
I like this better
because
this is my favorite.
Is it?
Because it's wide angle. Yeah, you don't have to leave it.
It's
here,
true.
But,
well, I don't look as short in that version.
You're actually as tall as I am. We've met in person, and you're actually as tall as I am. I always thought you were shorter, but we're actually.
I sound short. I've been told that. I have actually.
Really?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Somebody walked up to me and goes,
short.
They said you sounded shorter, and I'm like, what?
Huh?
Okay, can you hear that?
Yeah.
The woman in the tube is having problems in my bedroom. I don't know what I heard, but I hence always close the studio door when you're recording. We're talking about browsers. Daniel says, I switched to the Brave browser. It's built with the same source code as Chrome, but focuses on privacy.
Yeah, if you're worried about being spied on, Brave has kind of emerged as the default secure browser for people. They do strip everything out. There's no tracking that's in it. So it's a good way to go. It's a browser I leave on the desktop, and I should probably use a little more often. And it works just like Chrome does. By the way, Edge is going the same route. So if you're on Windows and
shocking,
you not right now, but in the next 6 months or so, they'll probably replace Edge with a Chrome-based version of Edge. So if that's all you have on your browser and you're going to use it. There you go. Microsoft, I don't think will spy on you as much. Will they not spy on you at all? I doubt it.
Ryan says, are you still loving StreamYard? I know I do.
Yeah, we've 3 weeks now. I've been using it at work. I've probably done 4 or 5 of these at work this way. The audience feedback has been tremendous. They love what we do all the time here by just bringing in the chat questions. We also will consider Zoom. We have an enterprise Zoom account, which is pretty helpful. I can use webcasts or webinars, I guess is what they call them in Zoom. But I don't know if I can, Dave, move away from this StreamYard at the moment. It works out pretty well. I see why Ross and Miss Eileen were so big on it, are so big on it right now.
Yeah. Jim Harold says, hoping Squadcast integrates automated scheduling with Calendly like Zoom. Here's the cool thing, Jim. This is what I do with it. Squadcast has a kind of a default room. I forget the name of it. And you can make it like always ready room or whatever. And then you can have the, here's your schedule link. Thank you so much for signing up. Blah, 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 blah. Here's the link to the meeting. Because that link never changes, it's good. And I believe they're doing it. I reached out to Zach at Squadcast and said, all I need to do is once that thing is over, let me rename that because I don't want to have 10 listings of generic name, generic name, generic name, generic name. But I love that. It makes it so easy then to, because I was like, now I've got this whole weird thing where I've got to do that. And yeah, it's pretty sweet because it works with, and then I don't know if they integrate with Google Calendar, but that's what in this case, Calendly does that for you. For me, I use Acuity scheduling. So, but that's how I do that because they have that kind of never changing. Going back briefly to the talk about advertising at shows, Kyle says at Podcast Movement, $2,500 for some.
Yeah, that would make sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
And then if you think about it, if you're charging $5 a person, and they're giving you $60 a year, you got to have a lot of people to pay for that $2,500. But
but like Podcast Movement has 3,000 or 4,000, right? So that's 75 cents a person to have potential access to them.
Yeah.
That's pretty cheap.
I just think the other thing that people, to me, I mean, I just said Mark from Awsound. Why? Because I met the guy and I hung out with him for a bit. It's that building a relationship. And wouldn't you want to go where your target audience is to see what they're complaining about, to see if you can invent the solution?
That may not be their target, though.
Yeah, that could be it.
Yeah. I would think like Podcast Movement, people would have figured out by now if that was their target, they would be there. But I think they've analyzed it and said, no, this large consumer space isn't going to be our play. We're not going to do the onesie twosies. We answer these questions all the time on Facebook. What's the best hosting provider? They don't want those customers. Like they're not interested in that. They're interested in the pros. And I'll be honest, some of them are probably going after the radio market. We talked about that. You talked about that, I think, in pre-show, right? It was here on the show. You met somebody from radio because you had your podcast shirt on. Well, the radio market is not, they've got all the tools and mechanics. They know how to do this. They're just looking for a new distribution way. And I think some of those middle level or some of these companies are going straight after the radio market. And so it's a little more targeted. And you're not finding the radio market for the most part.
Well,
you're not finding him in a podcast movement.
That's what Omni Studio did. They used to have, when I first launched Better Podcast, whatever it was, Best Podcasting Gear Podcast, they had like a $9 monthly thing. And it was weird because I went over the one day to check their pricing, and the only thing, they went strictly enterprise. Mm-hmm. And they were like, look, we're going after radio stations and big networks. And I was like, don't you care about me anymore, man? And they're like, no, not really. They're just not our target audience. Not that we hate you, but I was like, oh, okay. Well, I will quit referring indie podcasters to, go check it out as an option. So
it's just, there's more money in it. Like consumers are more stable at times, but on the enterprise, it's more risky, but there's just more money in it. And go ahead.
Well, the other thing is, if you have somebody paying $99 a month, they're not going anywhere.
Right.
You know what I mean? This is somebody who's in it to win it kind of thing. It's not like, I'm going to dip my toe in it and we'll try it for 3 months and see what happens. This is somebody who's probably done their research, and it's like I said, it's a network. They're going to move multiple shows over. And
they're not asking how they get free graphics for album art and how do I get my show notes for free, and how do I, They're not. These are pros that are willing to pay for all these things. They don't want to do it themselves, and to them, time is money. And so they're like, hey, no, I understand that I need to invest to make money. I think for hobby podcasters, right, it's fine. If you want to do this all for free, it's great on the hobby side. But if you're in this for the money, you got to treat it like a business, and you got to spend money to make money. And that's if you're not, chances are you're not going to go that far.
Right. Speaking of money, this would be a great time to thank our $5 donators. I keep making up new words. Patrons. Also people like Chris Holofield at IamSaltLake.com, Ed Ryan at Podcasting for Dummies, Eric Hunley at UnstructuredPod.com, Eliquity at TravelGlutenFree.me, Jason Bryan at Matt Talk Online, Jason at CUATX.com, Jeremy at TransmissionsPodcast.com, some guy named Jim Collison. You ever heard of him? I don't know.
That's kind of cheap at $5. Jeez, cheapo.
Yeah, average guy.tv. Joe Salsihigh at stackingbenjamins.com. Joe Taylor at On Face Edge. Kim Slusher at distractedlifepodcast.com. Rob Griffiths at bedtime.fm. Master Cauldron at cauldronscript.com. Rob at bedtime.fm/storytime. Troy Heinrichs at blacklistexposed.com. Troy Price at frontporchstudios.com. Troy, by the way, I did send your sticker in the mail. Kyle, you've heard of him. You love him. Kyle Bondo at gagglepod.com. And also podrect.com. I was on his show, I believe the last episode, talking about how I messed up the podcast rodeo show one day and put out an episode that had no Dave. That was an interesting episode. Matthew over at scottishpodcast.com. Michael Ray, Ross Brand at livestreamuniverse.com. Ryan at myperfectpodcast.com. And we will thank our dollar patrons shortly. So here is a question. Speaking of Kim Craggy, I had it. Where'd it go? Counting downloads. Maybe that's it. No, multiple mics. Oh, here we go. She said, I write a full script for my podcast and use it for my show notes. I try not to read them, but use them as the basis for my recording. To market my podcast, I share it on Facebook and in about 30 or 40 Facebook groups and pages. Here's my problem. The members of the Facebook groups and pages are only reading my points on Facebook and replying, or going to my show notes and reading and not listening. This is obvious by what they post in their response. So they're reading the content. I'm thinking that maybe I should reduce my show notes to a bare minimum when I first post and then upgrade the show notes later. I do not monetize, nor am I interested in doing so. Therefore, Patreon isn't going to happen with this podcast. What would you do in my situation? So Jim, I've already answered this. I want to see if you say the same thing I do.
Oh, yeah, because I think this is a complicated one, by the way. I'm not sure there's a right answer on this thing. So basically, let me make sure I understand the premise of this right. The written show notes are stealing from the people actually listening to the show.
Right.
That's the premise.
In a nutshell. Right? And she's not, the one that threw me is like, no, not threw me, but she's like, I'm not monetizing. So for me, my answer was, let's say I did a show and I had extensive show notes and I did audio and I did a YouTube channel. I'm of the ilk of, I don't care how you consume my content. You're consuming my content. So since she's not doing Patreon, or she's not doing advertising, like I don't really care about downloads then because I'm not doing CPM. So I was of the realm of they're reading your show notes. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I think if the goal is influence, whether they're reading them or they're listening to them, I get this feedback all the time on the Gallup side, like make this stuff available in print, which I think is insane. Like I'm like, the whole idea is that you can listen to this on the road, in a car, in a train, walking the dog, washing the dishes, right? Whatever. That's the whole idea. But I do realize there's folks who really enjoy the content. By the way, a mark of engagement when they want to read what you're saying, it's pretty great. Like they're engaged in the content. You're making the right content at that point. So yeah, you got to kind of provide it for them. I don't. I'm looking at Otter to kind of help us replace and do some automated transcripts to help with that. But if they're reading it and they're not listening, I could see where if you had an advertiser, that may be a problem because the advertisers want to hear by the way, you could just take the advertising stuff and put it in your show notes. Like, we call those speed bumps, right? You come through and then you break out that text and then you put the advertisement or whatever you want to put in there, whether that's your own advertisement, you could still do that in your show notes, by the way. You could call things out or do shout outs inside of those kinds of things. I think if it's hobby, I think it's fine. Let them go read. Kim's in the chat room. So I don't know what the drawback to that would be. I'm missing the drawback to them actually listening.
Yeah. Ryan says people actually.
Oh, she does have a sponsor. Yeah, so she does. She just said in the chat stream does have a sponsor. So yes, that's the case, right? If you want them to hear the sponsor stuff, okay, but do what I just said. Take the sponsor stuff and put it in the written content as well. Make a little speed bump, break it out, throw it in there, make it a little bit bigger. Some of those kinds of things. So if you're afraid they're going to the written content, write it in a way that the advertising is still in the written content.
Yeah, I mean, right now I have Chris Curran's Podcast Engineering School as a sponsor on the School of Podcasting, and smack dab in the middle of my show notes is a thing for the Podcast Engineering School. I am missing. You guys are talking about ROI somehow.
Well, there was a conversation going on about the ROI. Mm-hmm. Yeah, big money. But when do we see any ROI? And I was like, I see ROI all the time. And let me answer Kim's question and talk about this as well, right? So we also produce show notes these are our Gallup Enterprise podcasts that we do, right? They're all around strengths. It's all around our business. We're selling our product. It's a marketing podcast. That's what we do. So this year, we're actually moving our blogs from Blogger onto the Gallup.com infrastructure. And I've had a team now go through our show notes from a couple years ago, and we're introducing new breakout segments to them where we are putting in our own. We're calling out our own products through the show notes. So there's some way, like Kim, like what you're talking about, it where people are reading through, and then boom, hey, here's something available. If you're thinking about this, here's something available. Click on this, and you can buy something. Right? That's what your sponsor, that your advertiser is looking for. We know, I just did the stats for half a year. This is kind of crazy, Dave. You'll like this. So we did the stats for half a year. So January 1, 2019 through June 30th, 2019, just for those who are listening to this at another time. So I have a program, Theme Thursday, that's super, super popular. It's over half of our whole network. So the life of the network, we've done about 1.1 million downloads. That show represents 500,000 of those. So just shy of half of that. We did not do a single episode in the reporting period. So January through June, we took a break. We did another podcast. We told our audience we're taking a break. We're coming back. That show did 90,000 downloads, never having a show actually published to it in 6 months. Will people walk away from your content if you don't publish, but it's interesting and they like it? Yes. Like this is the, we have all these worries. Like if I take a week off, they're going to run away. No, they're not. Well, if you're boring, they might, but if you're interesting and they're engaged with you, 90,000 downloads, Dave, with not one single episode being created, which is to me pretty incredible, right? So our ROI on that, we have customers, we sell these strengths codes, right? And we have a community of certified coaches that I talk to. That's my job, is to talk to them every single week on these podcasts. We can continue to see the purchase of those codes increase over time. That's my ROI. Significantly enough in the millions that it makes a difference. And so, you can absolutely, there is an ROI on these things. If we've been doing it for 7 years. And the other ROI is, if I get these customers listening to my podcast, I can tell them to do things in real time, keep them up to date on platform changes and things that we're doing and new information, and get them involved. They're now informed consumers when they're making purchasing decisions. So that's the ROI when we think about all those things. I know I answered 2 questions in one, but any feedback on that?
No, that's I totally agree. It's yesterday our good buddy this guy,
no one will punch you in the face,
is getting ready to launch a podcast for his company, and he's totally, he gets it. It's like, okay, here's my target audience. You got to start there. Who is my target audience, and then what do they want to hear? And here's the content. Here's the goal that we want to do, and here's what they want to hear. Let's see where they overlap. And go that route. And he's doing a show for restaurant owners, and because the company he works for is a restaurant software company, so they're going to be their own sponsors. So they're going to do things like how. And so, by the way, he says hi. So he's like, I don't get up that early anymore, but he's recently moved, and he's Austin now, and used to be in Michigan. I go, it's just a little hotter in Texas, isn't it? And he's like, oh my God.
I love Ryan.
Yeah,
he's such a great guy. I need to get him back on my tech podcast because he's such a good podcaster. But the when the enterprise sees that, when you can make something interesting about your product and talk about it in a way, my daughter listens to this podcast. It's 4 hours long every week. It's on D&D, and she's not a D&D player. She's not gonna play D&D, but she's so interested in the personalities of the people playing this game that she knows all the details that are going on with them. It's Thursday nights, and it kills her when she can't watch it live. 4 hours live, 4 hours, right?
That's
no such thing as too boring.
Yeah, that's
right?
it.
Not too long but too boring, right? It's super engaging. We have found in our enterprise podcast, it's not a sales pitch, it's a relationship pitch. And so we talk to these people every single week. We talk to them in the chat room. We get emails from them. We see them at our conference that we just had. 1,500 people come from all around the world to our conference here in Omaha. We get a chance to talk to them and see them. I get a chance to talk to them personally. It's a relationship pitch. And when you make that relationship, with your Northeast Ohio podcasters meetup group, when you go to Podcast Movement, I always, when I'm hanging out around you at Podcast Movement, I want to spend time with you, but everybody's like, we got to talk to the Dave Jackson, right? That's the ROI, right? And they'll then you have the influence that you're looking for.
Yeah. And speaking of influence, people that influence me $1 at a time are my awesome $1 supporters. And we're talking about awesome people like Alan Palmer, Adam Higgins over at Odd Dad. Okay, I can never read this one. Odd Dad Out podcast.com. Here's the problem. Now I have to read through my microphone. Let's see. Anthony at route66podcast.com. Audio Dice Network at audiodice.net. Barb over at anchor.fm/BarbTUSA. Brandon at seahawkerspodcast.com. How long till football season?
Not short enough. It needs to hurry up and get here.
Dave over at Ottawa Works. Dan at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. A new patron, Dave over at thesoccersidelines.com. He should go check out Subs. Emily Prokop at
Never gets old.
It never
gets
does.
old.
The story behind podcast.com. Garrett at utrmedia.org. Bumble at mask. That's masqme.org. Gary and Margaret over at beekeepingpodcast.com. Craig at ingleaspodcast.com. Chris and Brandon at floridafocuspodcast.libsyn.com. The International Latin Podcast Awards at latinpodcastawards.com. James at creepykingdom.com. Jeff at Disney, that's DIZNEY, coast-to-coast.com. Jason at TV times 3, that's THREE. Jay at potstirpodcast.com. John at soberspeak.com. Lucas at triangletactical.net. Josh at onthebubblepodcast.com. I hope I got that right. I think it was last week. Can you go to onthebubblepodcast.com, Jim?
I'll look.
Make sure
you keep reading.
I'll keep reading.
Okay.
Mark at resourcefuldesigner.com. Mike at CreatePod, a podcast about the art of podcasting, at createpodATX.com. Patrick Keller at bigseancepodcast.com. Paul at fightingthroughpodcast.co.uk. Randall at randallblack.com. Ryle Davis Jr. Steve at earn.show. Sean at clarinet.com. Wayne Henderson at mediavoiceovers.com. And Cody Sison. If you would like to be, I almost forgot one. Zachary at seriousabouttech.com. And if you would like to be an awesome supporter, all you got to do is point your browser over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And we're this close to having our own live private Q&A. We're at like $290 something a month. And when we hit 300, we have an extra kind of live Q&A thing that's just for patrons only. So,
ooh, and I might even join if you make that level.
There you go.
On thebubblepodcast.com.
Okay. I think that's what I had, because I remember him saying, hey, you got my address wrong. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, I typed in on thebubblepodcast.com and it worked. It takes me to the landing page for that.
Got it. And we had another. Do we have anything in the chat room before I run away? We have a random shout out for Steve Cloyda, the prospecting expert who passed away a little over a week ago. Oh, that's a bummer. Was a really nice guy and longtime podcaster.
This is the interesting thing. Podcasting's been going on long enough now that we have longtime podcasters, 10, 15 years. It'll be interesting, I think, with my podcast at work when that hits a decade, 10 years. We're not that far away. I've been doing 7 now. And, you start thinking, man, 10 years talking to people and the evolution of that's pretty great.
Yeah. Here is a question from Facebook. Wendy Lee says, I'm wondering about how to quantify my numbers. I do a daily show as opposed to weekly. I typically get 40 to 50 downloads or listens per episode. Should I be thinking more in line of weekly numbers, say 250 listens per week rather than 40 to 50 per day? And the answer there is no. It's episode numbers are episode numbers. And that's the same way I was talking to a guy and he kept quoting me monthly numbers. And they were impressive. It was thousands of downloads. And I'm like, is that episode or monthly? And he goes, it's monthly. And I'm like, oh, what are your episodes? And when he told me the episodes, I was like, it was not as it's still impressive. But when you go from 15,000 downloads a month to, 700, you're like, oh, that doesn't sound quite as cool.
The only exception may be if you have 2 podcasts that are doing 2 different subjects and have 2 different audiences. Could you add those together, right? You could say, I think at Gallup we have our coaching stuff, and then we have our Gallup stuff, our Gallup news. We've got kind of around our polling stuff. Those, for the most part, are 2 completely. I have coaches on one side and kind of news junkies and political folks on the other. They blend a little bit, but I can kind of combine those together at times to say, yeah, this is our roughly, because our CEO is asking me all the time, what's our core audience? He asks me that all the time. And so I kind of have to be able to justify that and say, now on the coaching side, all those very similar audiences. So it would be tough to say, oh, I could take Call to Coach and Theme Thursday and put them, add those numbers together. I probably need to take a average or an aggregate or something along those lines if I'm looking for audience numbers.
Ross remembers my famous line from DC Podfest from last year. Monthly stats are crap.
It depends on what you do with them, right? If you compare them to themselves, that can give you a good indication of your listener, how are your listener numbers. But
my thing is I use that as a stat of how many people are downloading my back catalog, because 60% of my downloads in a month are from my back catalog. So, but you made a great point about comparing yourself, depending on the show. There was a really cool article. I will put this in the chat room and I will put it in the show notes. He said, talking very slowly as he behind the scenes looks to see what actual episode this is. If you go to Ask the Podcast Coach, why won't it open? Okay, I will tell you the episode number later. It's my computer. You know what? I have noticed one thing though, Jim.
Yeah, no lockups.
No lockups.
I think we maybe solved the problem.
Yeah. AskThePodcastCoach.com/258. I'll put a link to this article, but it talks about how you can't compare your podcast. Somebody in Facebook today said, I was comparing myself to some of these big shows, and it was just, basically kicking him where it counts. And he said, I finally decided that, hey, I went in my email and I had a couple people say, I really like the show. And I saw on Facebook where somebody said, I like the show. And he goes, and I said, yeah, that's like one of the worst things you can do is compare your show to other people. It's like, it just, it's.
Well, but don't, take away, because I think there is some helpful, when you see people do things and you like it and you're like, ooh, I could emulate that. Some of those kinds of things when you compare, I think some of those are good. And I think a little chip on your shoulder around numbers drive you to stay up a little late and maybe polish it a little bit more, or maybe think about the number of ums you say in the podcast, or, so don't compare yourself. But I get your point. Yeah.
We might have new patrons next week. Jim Harold is saying, got to run from Podlords. I want him to be just so I can say, of course he's got jimharold.com, but Podlords. And then the Beauty Bubble says, man, need to be a patron. Yes, you do.
I listen, I appreciate, let me just say this Patreon, it's Dave's thing. This is Dave's show. I'm here for the ride. I am just on Dave's coattails, holding on like crazy because he lets me show up on Saturday morning. So I appreciate you guys supporting Dave when you do that.
It's Dave's tax money as well.
It's true. Well, and you have to pay the taxes on it. That's the beauty.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it. I don't have to record it on my taxes. So good enough.
Jim, have you ever done any recording with people in the same room?
Yes.
Because somebody on Facebook, and unfortunately I forgot to get their name, my apologies, was saying they got bleed. Like,
yeah, you're gonna get bleed.
And that was my answer. It was like, I remember when I had this little office above a deli, and I was doing a show with my ex-wife, and it was about as big as this bedroom. It may be a little bigger. And we did the thing where at one point she was like almost in the other corner and I'm in the other corner, and our mics are facing directly opposite of each other. And her voice just carried like nobody's business. And it was just one of those where I would listen back and I'm like, I still hear her in my channel. And it was like, it was one of those, again, we could obsess over that and we could noise gate it out and blah. And I was like, in the end, could I hear her? Yes. Was it, could you hear me? Yes. Don't worry about it. It's like,
if it sounds good, don't worry about the multi-channels, and I know, that limits some editing and some things that you can do, but just do better vocally.
Yeah.
And when take more takes,
Yeah. And when you put them mono, it didn't really cause an issue, because I have seen that where people will somehow have their mics in a phase difference. So that when you put them mono, it basically cancels everybody out. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about that. It's one of those things, again, we start listening through the ears of a podcaster and we're like, oh, they're bleeding. And I'm like, yeah, if this was even in the music biz, you're going to have some drums on the bass track that's a bad one. But when you record things with a microphone and you're next to the drummer, you're probably going to have a little bit of, but again, that's where you go, I think I can hear the bass drum over the guitar. And you're like, no. So
yeah, you're like, don't worry about it. In most cases, that's such a narrow niche of people actually doing that. In most cases, just don't worry about it. Like, it's just put it on a single track, put that thing on mono, you'll be fine in 99% of the time.
Yeah. What do you think Leo charges CPM for his, because he actually let it slip, apparently. I saw
really?
This. Yeah.
Really? I have no idea.
For this week in Google.
$75? No.
Is that your final answer?
Yeah, sure. Why not? What?
Anybody else in the chat room want to guess what Leo's charging CPM for this week in Google? This is where I need
Is it ridiculous?
It's more than I thought it was.
Oh. $500.
No, that's a little too much. I'm
250.
sorry, you've
250.
$90.
Oh, that's pretty close.
Yeah. So yeah, you said 70. I'm like, oh, that's pretty close.
Yeah.
But and then the person put it out there as just kind of like, hey, it's Leo. And because people are like, kind of like, that should be, does that mean everybody gets to charge $90? And I'm like,
his ads are too long.
I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, his ads are too long for sure.
But
he gets it, and he gets people to keep doing it. So whether they're too long or not, it works. Like he gets advertisers and he gets them at that price. I think, Dave, don't you think for most podcasters, 50 is a good place to start? Like that just seems
so many people start at 20 and then they end up at 35. And I'm like, it's, and I don't even do the CPM. I just do a per episode.
Just do a flat. Don't, I think if you're under 5,000, just do monthly. I mean, do a flat monthly rate. Just make it easy on everybody. And just to negotiate with the person that you're working with on value, and stop worrying about all the numbers. Actually get engagement, sell their stuff, like get some way of tracking that. But I think we think about it too much sometimes.
I did get a question that we're going to play. This is from Glenn, but not Glenn the Geek. He said, hitting the button.
Hey, Dave, this is Glenn Reeder. You and I spoke about maybe 2 months ago now when I was inquiring on starting a podcast. Well, I've launched it and I have some episodes available and I need some feedback, some criticism, someone to tell me where I'm going off on, where I'm doing okay at. Because you can't trust your loved ones, because your loved ones are just going to tell you that you're doing great and they love it and you're amazing. I need somebody from the.
So he goes on there. Where would you get feedback, Jim? I mean, you could hire. That's the thing. I emailed him back and said, it's funny you should ask that. Have you ever heard of the podcast review show that I do with Eric K. Johnson? If you want serious tons of constructive feedback, podcastreviewshow.com. But what if you don't want to spend the $99 for 2 podcast consultants because I'm a podcaster and I want things for free?
Well, then you're going to be dependent on listeners who you may or may not be able to get any feedback from. I mean, it's if it doesn't work, listen, I will not do the brakes on my car. I don't trust myself. I'm not good at it. I don't have the right tools. I'm not going to do the brakes. That's one of those kinds of things. I remember I told somebody, I'm taking in to get the brakes done. Well, you could just do that yourself. I'm like, are you freaking crazy?
Yeah.
Yet sometimes we expect, to be able to get all of that or do it ourselves. And there's just some things you can't do yourselves and you need to pay somebody to get it done. I'd say, if $99 is out of the budget for you, you're then dependent on finding someone. You're going to spend that in time finding people or begging your listeners or whatever, right? Just pay it and get it done and get the feedback that you need.
Yeah, I remember. Do you still change your own oil?
No.
I'm going to say I used to when I was like 16.
Yeah. I was in the military and I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. Yeah, sure.
But because if you mess up on something on your car, you don't want it to be your brakes.
Yeah, no, that's not I'm not good at, there's all these things you need to know. And everybody's like, oh yeah, piece of cake. And I'm like, nah, not a piece of cake for me. I'm going to pay somebody. I just think, Dave, there's those times when you need to, I think about all the hack jobs I've done on stuff here in the house where I complain about the last guy and I'm like, God, this was done so shoddy. So I go to fix it. And then I make it twice as shoddy. And I'm like, there is some value in just having somebody else come in. I had some folks come in and do some mud jacking of some steps. We have some concrete that I got out of level. And in an hour, drilled some holes, filled it up, got it level, they were gone. I could have jacked around with that thing because there's DIY ways to do that. Yeah. I would have spent a whole afternoon getting eaten alive by the bugs, sweating, a sunburn. Sometimes it just pays to pay. And so I think with podcasting, make that determination on where the most value is. $100 is not bad to get somebody to review your show, especially with the 2 of you. And Eric K. Johnson, he's a great guy.
Yeah. And then Michael says that was the best $99 I ever spent on my podcast. I didn't mean to turn this into a giant plug.
No. But what's a great service? And if you want to get feedback, I sometimes don't want to get feedback on my show. I get afraid of it. I mean, I listen to all my shows, but I don't, I'm like, I've thought about having you do that on my show. And I'm like, I don't know if our relationship could survive that.
Where's Jim at this week? I don't know.
He just quit. We reviewed his show last week and he just quit.
We did get some feedback from Kyle.
Hello, Dave and Jim. Just want to leave you some feedback on some recent podcast episodes. First of all, your episode from June 15th entitled, Is There a Podcasting Pay Gap? I just thought that was one of the best episodes you've ever put out of Ask the Podcast Coach. I'm going to go back and listen to the whole thing and take notes on it and send that episode over to another podcaster that I'm helping get started, and just give him some advice and tips and things that he can learn from that. So great episode. Really appreciated all the conversation there. And then the other note was on the most recent episode, you were talking about some hardware gear and things like that, and the Rodecaster and the PreSonus Mix Pre 3.6 thing, whatever that is called. Another one that has come up, I don't think I've heard you guys talk about it yet, but it's from Zoom, the Zoom F6. I guess it hasn't even technically been released yet, but it seems like it's going to be a really good option with 6 inputs, and it has a lot of stuff. It has like dual something to prevent clipping. So you basically can't ever clip the audio, but it's supposed to be really nice and record USB as well. So thought that was interesting.
So thank you, Kyle, for that. And I made a mistake. I got all excited because I thought it was the Zoom. I thought because it was from Bangs, not Bangs, the guy in the chat room normally, the king of Reddit, Bangs. And I thought it was the Zoom H4. It's the Zoom F4, which is kind of the basically Mix Pre 6. What's the word? Competition. And it's like $300 cheaper. The Mix Pre 6 is like $900, and this thing goes for about $600, which we sound like that's cheap. It's only $600. But if you're and it's made for field recording, hence the whole 6 inputs plus it's 4 inputs and then a stereo kind of lighting like I'm using now for the iPad here. So that's what we're talking about. But thank you, Kyle, for the feedback. Jimmy, looking
at Zoom F4 550 on Sweetwater right now.
Yeah. So versus the Mix Pre 6, which is $900. So
no show for me this week, Dave. And in the post show, I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of taking a vacation from your podcast. So we'll talk about that in the post show.
Absolutely. And this week I'm going to do it because I'm not doing anything this weekend but reporting podcasts, because Sunday I'm going to Pittsburgh for Libsyn. I'll be in Pittsburgh next week, Monday through Wednesday, at a Libsyn podcasting thing, which means I normally record my podcast on Sunday. So I'm doing it all today. It's all podcasting all day. And I'm going to release the episode on everything I know about interviews, which I've been working on for quite some time and actually could be a book at this point. So stick around for some post show. We are here every Saturday. AskThePodcastCoach.com/live. Thank you to the chat room. Stick around for some post show.